Hi, I'm Julian Gomez, and today I'm going to talk about Venezuela's military intervention. Venezuela's situation has worsened to a point where it risked the United States' national security. Venezuela's failed state is not only a humanitarian crisis, but also a place where sovereignty is being misused. A country where, according to Inside Crime, has ties with terrorist groups such as Hezbollah and ELN. Venezuela has lost democracy, and the country's humanitarian crisis is affecting the region, gathering attention from other countries around the world on how to fix the crisis. Many people argue which is the best way to deal with this issue. Some suggest Venezuela should be military intervene, while others suggest only Venezuela can solve their internal problems. But Venezuela is not a sovereign country where democracy and human rights are respected. Venezuela's humanitarian and democratic crisis must be solved by a military intervention instead of diplomatic and economic sanctions. A military intervention can save more Venezuelan lives than any kind of sanctions. According to the United Nations News, 7 million Venezuelans are in need of humanitarian assistance, where 3.7 million are believed to have suffered from starvation. 2.8 million people are estimated to need health assistance. In 2017, 400,000 cases of malaria were reported. 17% of the people living in poverty have no access to safe water, and 2.7 million people are 2.7 million are people in the country that needs protection assistance. That sums up to the 25% of the Venezuelan population. The United Nations and other countries have already tried to send humanitarian aid, but the Venezuelan regime does not accept any kind of help. They only received a shipment of humanitarian aid, and it was supposed to be delivered by the Red Cross, in accordance to the regime terms. But this aid is not enough for the people, and there has been rumors that the humanitarian aid is being resold in Caracas. Now, the question relies on how more lives can be saved. If economic sanctions keep going, there is no way to count how many will die. The only certain thing is that economic and diplomatic sanctions keep going. Maduro prefers Maduro prefers to kill his own people rather than give up power as he has been doing. On the other hand, Foreign Affairs magazine suggests that a military intervention could have two outcomes: a long-lasting military operation that could take months and thousands of civilians killed, or a disintegration of the Venezuelan army may happen and Maduro's regime will last a week. This will result in fewer casualties and is more likely to happen. As a Venezuelan, I know it's not a secret the military is angry at Maduro's circle. Although they have the highest salaries, they also have families and friends that suffer from the consequences of the crisis. In addition, military intervention will make the American continent more stable than any kind of sanctions. Right now, the United Nations Refugee Agency reports that there are 3.4 million Venezuelans that have fled the country, making it the biggest Latin American migration in history. The migration wave is so big that some countries struggle to give help to all Venezuelans getting in, and this has led to a big concern through the Latin American countries. The humanitarian crisis will increase exponentially if more sanctions take place, making it harder for neighbor countries to provide help. Also, there is a concern that the main allies of Venezuela's regime are Russia, Turkey, China, Cuba, and Iran, and these countries have taken advantage of Venezuela's crisis to be more active in the American continent or benefit from the crisis. For these reasons, it is critical that US and other American countries defend the region. National security can be at risk if diplomatic and economic sanctions take place, and there is no military intervention. China is right now in a trade war with the US, while the US just deployed an aircraft carrier to Iran, and tensions with Turkey and Cuba have been growing. All these countries do not have interest in a democratic transition in Venezuela. Reuters reported that in March, Russia deployed approximately 100 Russian soldiers to provide airstrike defense assistance to Venezuela, while John Bolton has said that there are around 20,000 Cuban troops on Venezuelan soil. Venezuela is also known as a terrorist paradise. The Congressional Research Service shows that Venezuela has already been sanctioned in 2006 by the US government because of their ties with terrorist group Hezbollah. It is not enough retaliation to just add sanctions while these nations take more power over Venezuela by subsidizing the regime. A military intervention can offer a better economic forecast than economic sanctions. Economic sanctions will make Venezuela's economy worse. These sanctions do not lead to a better economic forecast. Venezuela is the country with the biggest oil reserves in the world, and one of the richest natural oil resource countries, and one of the richest natural resource countries. The transition will lead to a change in the Venezuelan market, and the Venezuelan market and economy that will lead to a more stabilized economy. Throughout history, Venezuela and the United States have always been strong allies. Venezuela was the biggest oil supplier to the United States until Hugo Chavez and then his predecessor, Nicolas Maduro, took charge. If the economic ties between Venezuela and other countries was reestablished, the democratic transition will ensure a more stable economy in all the continent. Economic sanctions have weakened Nicolas Maduro's regime, and there have been attempted coups inside the military. However, Maduro still holds power. The executive branch of the country consists mostly of high-ranking officials that conspire with him because they are as guilty as Maduro. They know the only way they won't face justice is by staying in power at all costs. And that is one of the most fearful things not only Venezuelans should be afraid of. 61 years have passed since the US imposed Cuba their first embargo, and nothing has changed. Venezuela is not an island. There are land borders with Colombia, Brazil, and Guyana. There is a 30 million population where a quarter of that population is in need, and a military army that has decided to starve their people. It is important to any country in the whole American country. Democracy and human rights should not be taken lightly, or other nations might face the same fate. Neighbor countries have the duty to stand for prosperity, and a military intervention is not the best, but the only option. Venezuela's freedom not the best, but the only option to Venezuelans' freedom and democracy. Thank you.